filmed like a year ago.
Yes, ma'am. They edited it well.
That's my daughter said she thought they did a fair job of it.
A lawyer told me he really thought it should be required viewing for people in school to see how the process works,
Yeah,
kind of how you can get the prosecutor and the defense counsel on the same page.
yeah.
And it appears that
Sometimes.
the lap pool has not arrived, so I can actually take one of those chairs if y'all want to spread out a little bit more.
We take up a lot of space. We need space.
Or we can get really close.
All right. How you doing?
Good. How are you? I'm
Good,
Tasha.
good. Tasha, see that? Nice to meet you.
So I'm Brady's other half.
How you doing?
Clark,
How
Cassie.
you doing, man?
Good. And I think you know.
Yeah, he knows me
I think I'm a little bit. Yeah, I know.
You gonna pray us in?
Oh, I'll give a little
Large and
history
in charge.
lesson. Well, good evening, everyone. So my name is Brady Whitten, and I'm the pastor here at First United Methodist Church, and it's a privilege to welcome you all here. I'm always the one who gets to interrupt everyone during their conversation that they're having at the beginning of the meal, so I apologize for that, but I just want to welcome you and in a moment offer a prayer. But I want to give you a little, this is the Methodist history part for those of you who might not be Methodist. So the founder of the Methodist movement was a man named John Wesley, and John Wesley was a strong believer in the power of education to lift people out of poverty. And he really made that direct connection that education is a way out of poverty. And he believed that poverty was not God's will and that people really should have access to the resources and the gifts that God had given them as the creation. So Methodists, you might hear the story told that Baptists were the first proponents of Sunday school. It's not true. Methodists were the first proponents of Sunday school, but it was not for the sake of simply doing religious education. It was because children in the 18th century were, you got to think like Charles Dickens. They were working in factories, they were working in mines, and the only time that they had access to educational opportunities was on Sundays, because Sundays were the one day they did not have to work. And so the Methodists would bring children to the churches to teach them how to read and how to do, just some very basic educational types of things. And lo and behold, it changed their lives. And so Methodists have been long proponents of public education. You can go all around our country and you can see Methodist schools, Methodist universities. First United Methodist Church has continued that tradition in Baton Rouge. We are partners with 2 elementary schools. We partner with Bernard Terrace Elementary and with Magnolia Woods Elementary. And we help them with volunteers and supplies and money. And so our church has really continued this emphasis that Methodists have on education. And so I'm really grateful for our Methodists for Social Justice group, and particularly Jennifer Carwile. Where'd Jennifer go? There's Jennifer. Thank you for all your work pulling this together. But so we are a congregation that values public education. We value our partnership with East Baton Rouge Schools. We're really glad that you're here and hope that we can consider this problem that we're facing of learning loss and see what can we do as a community. So I thank you all for being here. Thank you for the time that you've taken to invest a little energy. And I do want to ask a prayer, ask a blessing over our meal and our time together. But will you bow your heads with me? Lord God, we thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for the church and all that it means in our world, the way that it tries to be your hands and your feet and your presence to those in need. And so as we consider the topic of learning loss and how we can be partners with our schools and how we can encourage our children and our families, we just ask that you would be with us, guide our thinking, guide our action. And Lord, for the food that was prepared and provided tonight, we give you thanks, and we ask that it would nourish our bodies and us to your service. And it is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. All right.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I apologize. I've got my mask on. I'm planning to travel in the not too distant future, and I'm not getting sick, so I'm keeping my mask on. So if I need to speak up, give me a little thumbs up, and I'll work on that. My name is Jennifer Carwile. I'm the chairperson for Methodists for Social Justice. We're a small group here at First Methodist. And as Brady explained, part of the mission of Methodism is to promote social justice, and we really, that's something that's, for our members, is something that's important to our hearts. We want to address systemic issues in our society and help to try to bring about solutions. So we had our first educational forum in February of 2020. It was about homelessness. And if you notice, homelessness is still in the news. Unfortunately, we had big plans coming out of that forum, and we were going to have a great meeting on March 23rd. And I think on March 13th, the world shut down. So that kind of got derailed, and so we are happy to be back with this is our first post-pandemic forum. So I appreciate you being here tonight with us. I want to thank Monica Bradster and Carol Ann Brown. Reverend Witten gave me much more credit for this event than I deserve. Monica and Carol Ann really pulled together all of our speakers, the questions, the agencies for volunteering. So Monica had a fall, and she's not able to be here, so she's streaming. She's actually watching us. But let's give Monica and Carol Ann a moment. Okay. I also want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their day to share with us. I know that these are all busy people, and I appreciate that you're taking time for us. And hopefully at the end of this, we will bring a benefit to you all as well. What I'd like to tell you a little bit about learning loss, it's an issue facing our parish. It's an issue facing the whole country. What learning loss means is that during the pandemic, schooling was erratic. Kids were in school, they were home from school. They were on the computer didn't work. The school computer didn't work, the home computer didn't work. The kids just decided not to look at the computer. It was erratic. And that caused students to have slower growth with the reading and the math and science. Test scores have shown that. Teachers and work have shown that. Teachers have known that. And what it means is there's a gap between where the students would be or should be had the pandemic not happened and where they actually are now. And so that is what is referred to as learning loss. So tonight what we're going to hear about from our panelists is about post-pandemic learning needs in our community. So each of our panelists is going to have some time to kind of talk about this issue from their perspective. And then at the end, we're going to have some time for questions, but here are how questions are going to work. You've got index cards at your table. So if you have a question, there's pencils or pens, you've got an index card, write your question down, and then if you wave it in the air, I've got Mr. Fred Skelton, and I believe I've got Miss Jamie Spencer here. They will come around and take your questions, and they'll bring them to me, and when we have time, I'll answer the questions. If you look in your program, there are really nice bios of our speakers, so I'm not going to do a lot of time introducing our speakers. I think we know who a lot of these folks are, and you can read about them here. Also, there are some agencies that deal with learning and students, and there's some descriptions on the back. So there's all sorts of information here, and I think we're ready to get started. So we're going to start with our district attorney, Hiller Moore. I've lived in Baton Rouge for a long time, and Mr. Moore has been our DA for a long time, and I've heard him many times make a correlation between education and crime that happens. So I know he's got some slides that he's going to talk about, and then if we have some time, we'll have some questions.
Thank you, Pastor. First of all, thanks for inviting me, and congregation. Also, thanks for electing me, I think. So if you know, Jennifer knows I used to be 6'2", dark complected. I'm 5'8", got white hair, really pale skin now. So I got beat down pretty good over the last 14 years, but I enjoy each and every day working for you guys and for the people that we deal with on either side of this. I'm also encouraged by the young people we get to work with, and then the groups like Jennifer's group and this group of folks that we have here, and particularly now to talk about education. Also, I'm a backsliding Methodist. I'm a Catholic, so I hope that you accept that today. So I have a few slides that I want to show you a little bit. This slide presentation that I have is from a COVID 2020-2021 crime presentation, and it shows you how difficult things have become over the last 2 years, and I think this all really correlates with education. And I'm glad that we have Cito Narcisse here, and I know Dr. Cassidy is here as well. These two folks that I know better than the others do a lot of work with education. And education is the key, or lack of education, or the shackles that are tying people away and down or from where they need to get. And I'm really excited about the energy that Cito brings. And I think the first day he was nominated, I called him on the cell phone and said, let's get to know each other, because Baton Rouge is going to only go as well as you go. And Baton Rouge is going to only be as good as our public education system is, and that has always been the truth. And I believe that I've been here 14 years as DA. I believe he's my 5th or 6th superintendent of education, which is not a good sign. We want people to stay here and be successful. So what I'd like to do is run through you some of the really bad problems that we have, and I'd like to end with the slide that kind of says it all. So first slide, if you don't mind, is look at the murder rate. So Louisiana murder rate is 14% per 100,000 people. The overall United States murder rate is 7.8. So just start right here in Louisiana. We are double what the overall United States murder rate. Unfortunately, sir, in the next slide, I know it's hard to see, look at where we are in Baton Rouge at 46% per 100,000 population. So we are triple the word. I'm bad at math. We very, very bad numbers that we have. And Baton Rouge has always traditionally had a very high violent crime number, very bad murder number compared to other places, even other places just in the South. And so this is a number that we're not proud of, but I do believe this goes hand in hand with what we see. Next slide. Again, completely related to education or lack of education, and particularly, I believe, to COVID-related and students not being in classroom and being at home and away from teachers who help them and identify problems. Look at, this is the juvenile murder rate for the different years that we've had. Look at 2021 when we're all locked in, and that was as November 9th. I think we wound up that year with 16 juveniles. That is, at that time, I think, age of 17 and below, young juveniles, kids who had been charged with second-degree murder, which is a big number. This year in 2022, I believe that we're at 8 already, which is a big number. So that's way too many youngsters. Next slide. In 2021, look at the number of homicides committed. This is statewide, not local. 99 homicides committed by juveniles. These are children or kids that should be in school, high school, grammar school. Look at the ages, 17, 16, 15. That's a 130% increase. Again, I do believe that is directly related to COVID and to the lack of learning, the loss of learning, as Jennifer has indicated. Next slide. Also, you've probably seen in some articles that have come out recently, and I know the panelists know this much better than I do, but I think, again, related to COVID and lack of education in the classroom, and not only COVID, but hurricanes and things that we have seen here more than others. We face a mental health crisis, not only in our state and in the nation, but particularly in our state, but also children aged 3 to 17. 10% of those children are diagnosed with depression and anxiety. That's a big number. Look at the kids count number. We're 49th out of 50 in economic well-being, education, health, family, and community. Those are big numbers that really equate. Next slide. And again, you can continue going down. I don't have to read them all, but social isolation, fear, trauma, bereavement. These young folks are seeing and feeling all of this as we speak. And I want you to know that now we're talking about regular children who have families and or somewhat of a decent family life. When we're dealing with the young kids that we deal with, and Mr. Potter is here, I want to thank him. Mr. Potter is a CPA on the Truce Board. The Truce Board is the kids who are the actual trigger pullers. Those are the kids that nobody else wants to deal with or can deal with. Mr. Potter was our CPA for years, and those group of people sacrifice a lot, and they go after that kid who is likely to kill or be killed. And thanks for your service that you gave, and I know that Ralph Stevens, who's a member here, also has helped us on those boards. So those kids see it even more than these kids that we're talking about now that are actually in school. So very, very difficult things. Next. How can we help? It's direct intervention counseling. And when the kids are not in school, they're not seeing the teacher, they're not seeing the counselors. Also, you see at the bottom of the slide, adults in the children's lives, not only the teachers, but family members, neighbors. They have to practice their own good mental health. Look at the comment on the bottom. On the airplane, they always tell you, parent, put your own mask on first, then get to your child. Well, same thing here. If the parent is not healthy, how can the child be healthy? It just can't happen. And you're not going to fix a family situation by fixing one child. You have to really fix the whole family wraparound services, you name it. Next, sir. Casey Foundation recommendations for lawmakers, and I think some of this session we have addressed some of this to try to tackle these and ensuring that the youth get the help that they need. And lastly, you'll see local solutions, nationwide common sense media, children and screens, state and 211 phone system, different mental health associations, and in Baton Rouge, Healthy Baton Rouge with the mayor, and Capital Area Human Services. And I'd like to end with that last slide. So look at the left-hand side. We are the worst, top of the last in incarceration, murder rate, violent crime, property crime, and welfare of our students and our families ourselves. That's where we are. We're always number 50 on that list, or number one way or the other, which is not a good number to be in. Look on the other side. So where are we with poverty, employment, healthcare, literacy, ACT scores, education, you name it. Look where we are. So we're completely lopsided. To me, if we spend our money, and I say that collectively as a state, if we have to invest in our kids. That's our future. We do not invest in our kids early on from birth, and it used to be, I thought, 6th grade, then it was 3rd, then it was kindergarten. Now it's got to be prenatal and birth. If we don't invest in kids and families and put them first, you're going to continue to invest money in me and in the public defender and in police, which is not where your money is the best spent. We don't do a great job raising children. We're not supposed to. Families are supposed to raise children. Churches, communities, neighborhoods are supposed to raise children. And my suggestion is you make a difference when you vote. I think the school board elections, in my opinion, are the most critical people that we can elect because they are the ones who are direct where our children education and where our future of our city goes. So I've run out of my time, and I apologize I had the flag. So I'll take any questions if I get some. If not, if there are questions, Jennifer, when I leave, I'll be glad to either call you on the phone and speak with you personally or email you back or whatever way is easier to answer anyone's questions. So if anyone has a question, I'll be glad to try to answer. Yes, ma'am. She wanted to know whether I felt the new homeless promulgation is going to do any good. I'm not sure. If you read the article in the paper, I think they're well intended, but the problem is we're not solving the problem. We still have to solve the problem, and that's the problem. And there's a big hurdle in that you have to, the police, if they want to pick someone and put them in jail, which is not the right place for mental health, and these people suffer mental health, they have to certify there's no bed available. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. So it's going to be difficult, I believe, to enforce. But homelessness is an issue. Yes, sir.
What's the primary reason that these young offenders are out?
Man, it's a good question. I know C2 will chime in and others, but hopelessness, lack of education, lack of parents. There's a lot of things, barriers that are that stand in the way of kids. It's not always they don't want to go to school. They feel embarrassed. They're behind. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why. It's not that they just don't want to. And so I'd really defer more to them. But the bottom line, it falls back on us because we see them in court, which is the wrong place to see these kids. So again, thanks you guys for doing what you do. You do play an important role. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. I was told this mic was going to be on all night, and yet it's not working, so help. Okay. I really appreciate Hiller Moore being here. He had to go to another, thank you. There we go. He had to go to another event. What we're going to do for the rest of the time is we're going to have our folks speak, and then we'll take questions at the end. So once again, if you have a question, go ahead and write it on the card. And I think most of our questions, this is a complicated issue, so it's not going to be one person having one answer. I think most people on our panel are going to have some ideas about that. So our next person who's going to come up is Ms. Dimitri Alexander, and many people from our church are familiar with Ms. Alexander because she was the principal for Bernard Terrace Elementary, and we're partners with that school. Now she's starting her second year in a position at the central office, and she's supervising principals of all different grade levels. So she's not affecting directly the children, she's affecting all the people who are affecting the children. So what we're going to ask you to start with is, if you think back to the beginning of COVID, what was teaching and learning like for students? How did you all discover that there were issues? And, you know, just talk to us a little bit about school. Come on up.
I always have to bring it down. Good evening, everyone. I feel like I'm back at home. I was just telling Ms. Smith last May before last, I thought it was my last time gracing the stage here as Bernard Terrace's principal, but just glad to be back. And March 13th, 2020, I think a day that I will never forget, just as my birthday, when school as I knew it was going to change forever. However, on that day, I did not realize that it was going to change forever. So we went out, and the directives from central office on that day was to create a packet for students for 2 weeks. So we thought that, okay, it'll be like a winter break, and we'll be back at it, right? So prepared the packets for 2 weeks, and you know, sent the students home with packets and everything. And as I began to look at the news a little more and having more communication with the central office, and we were on various calls with the State Department of Education, it hit me then that things will no longer ever be the same with education. So at this time, it was just a matter of thinking about Chromebooks. So my first thinking was, I am going to order some Chromebooks for my school. So I'm thinking I'm getting ahead of the game, maybe 2 weeks in. Called, and it was already a back order on Chromebooks because other administrators in school districts was thinking of the same thing. So at this time, it was just a lot of planning in my head. One, not only to get students and families ready for, we didn't even know it was going to be a new normal per se, but just getting them ready for this transition. But then also, as a school administrator, getting my teachers ready for how school would look moving forward. So this was a lot of teaching teachers how to utilize technology, but not only teachers, just preparing our families and parents. But not only that, access to technology was also an issue. And we were able to curtail that with many I guess it just was amazing that I was kind of forward thinking where we were one-to-one, meaning that every student at Bernard Terrace currently had a Chromebook or some type of device. So traditionally at that time, it was grades 3 through 12. So I was just trying to get an extra set because I did understand that moving forward, students would have these Chromebooks or what have you at home. So it was a management of just making sure that the students had access to Chromebooks, but also access to the internet, right? So we began virtual school on April 28th. So before that, it took us a lot of preparation to get ready for what virtual school would look like, being sure that we're not only educating students at this point, but we're educating families on how to utilize this new mode of learning, which was, we would always talk about parental involvement, but at this time we realized we needed parents and extended families more than ever because we had grandparents, while some parents may have been back at work, we had a lot of extended families with children during school hours. Also, we had to be extremely flexible because school wasn't 8:30 to 3:30. Oftentimes, teachers had to teach at different times, answering calls from parents, emails, oftentimes teams meetings or what have you after hours because oftentimes when parents got off from work, they still needed to assist their children. So being a teacher and an administrator, I felt like I worked the hardest from March on, that those few months was extremely hard. But then getting ready for August, and just with everyone was just really still scared about the health concerns of COVID, of course. So just easing and taking care of people, not only with the educational piece, but also taking care of the hearts of people. Because I had to allow my teachers to know that school is a safe place. And that was scary because I was scared. So it took a level of vulnerability that I had to show my staff members to let them know, hey, I'm back. And we're in this together. And those of you that know me understands how I'm big on relationships. So it was a lot of nurturing not only the students, but also all the adults that were involved. So I really felt like I became a true big mama at Bernard Terrace at that point, just because we had to get minds and just a shift so that we can address the needs of our students. With the effect that it's had on education, if you guys can think about, many of you are reading friends, and you know the importance of teaching children to read, how to pronounce letters. A mask does not help you when you're trying to teach that because children need to see your mouth, the placement of your lips, your teeth, and things of that nature. So those students that were in kindergarten at that time are now taking the LEAP test for the first time. So it's a lot of acceleration that needs to occur, and we're still working on, because oftentimes you guys knew that the population that we served, those students were behind coming to school. And so hence why we had to do a lot of initiatives at the school to kind of get them where they needed to be initially. But now they're significantly behind. And Dr. Narcisse will speak about many of the things that we're doing as the district just to accelerate learning for the students, but then providing the interventions and things that's in place to be sure that we're meeting the needs of the students. Any questions? It's going to be short and sweet.
Yeah. Great. So, you touched on a little bit about kids with masks. Was there a grade level that you saw, or who had the most effect?
I would say our kindergarten students and first grade students, because that's the grade levels where they're the early literacy with those foundational skills. So those students struggled a little more than some of the older students. Pre-K, because we were able to engage them with a lot of with their tablets, you know, they're tablet babies anyway, so that was helpful for them. But teaching students how to read, they need that help. The mask didn't help. And then I know a few of you guys with the donations of the see-through masks. So my teachers had the opportunity to utilize those, and that was helpful as well. But I think the grade levels that had a big that suffered the most were the grades of first grade, second grade students.
And those kids are third and
Those
fourth
students
grade?
are now third and fourth
Third
grade
and fourth grades
students.
now.
Yes,
Okay, great.
yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm showing that the problem with masks, I can't lick my fingers, so now I can't turn my page. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Laura Cassidy. Dr. Cassidy is a medical doctor, but she also has been involved in children and education. She is the chief founder of the Key Academy. It's a charter school for children with dyslexia. So I know some folks have knowledge of dyslexia, some folks might not. So maybe you can start with kind of explaining a little bit about the special challenges.
Yes, thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be here to talk about dyslexia. And I do think we have to start and talk a little bit about what it is, because unfortunately, most people are confused. I am with the Louisiana Key Academy. It is a public charter school. We're in our 10th year. We're on Government Street, and we serve K through 8th grade, and we have a bit over 400 students. We opened our second school this August in St. Tammany in Covington, and we plan on opening a third school in Caddo, which is southern Shreveport, next August. And so I think people are like, well, you know, what is this school, and why is it even needed? And so dyslexia is very common. We know from studies that it affects 20% of the population. Now, just like any medical entity, it can be mild dyslexia or it could be moderate to severe. All our kids are moderate to severe, and they've all struggled academically in school. And they come to us to find out why they're struggling. The definition in federal and state law, this state, Louisiana, defines dyslexia as an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader. Just hang with me, and this is a long definition. Most commonly caused by difficulty in phonological processing, and that is appreciating the sounds of the spoken word, the smallest sounds of the spoken word. And the effects of that are on the individual's ability to read, speak, write, and spell. So the unexpected is very important. It confuses people, but we have scientific data that, and most people get this, that IQ and reading are related. That if you're not dyslexic, the higher your IQ, the better reader you are. I mean, your mom probably told you that when you were young, and we all growing up hearing that. But what we know now is that in dyslexia, this dynamic relationship between IQ and reading is not there. So you can be a very bright individual, anywhere from average IQ to like Einstein, and your reading is not commensurate with your IQ. And so this, again, depending on whether it's mild, severe, it has these different manifestations. But what we know from the MRIs is the reason for this is they're reading in a different part of the brain. So just broadly speaking, if you're not dyslexic, you read from the posterior left part of your brain. We know that they're reading from these anterior systems. So we know it's a valid entity. We know that they're bright, and we know that they have to work hard to read, and they're slow readers. So it's not fun, and as you know, most of school is about reading and writing.
Can we kind of talk a little bit about how did learning during COVID especially affect your students?
Yeah, so that was my next page, but I will go ahead and tell you. So, because it's important to understand that two things. The academic gap is present, this is without a pandemic, is present in the first grade, and that is published in the Journal of Pediatrics in 2015. And if you think about it, if you're having to match the sounds of the spoken word to squiggly print, the alphabet, that spoken word starts at 2, right? Somewhere around 2 years old. And then you're matching it to the alphabet at 3, 4, 5. So when they're in the first grade, even without a pandemic, they're behind. We also know, and Kayla and my other colleagues over at the table there, we went into the prisons. And we have a study that was published in the Journal of Corrections. And we screened and tested prisoners for dyslexia. And we found that 50% of the prisoners are dyslexic. And this is, again, pre-pandemic. And it's just what Hiller was talking about. They're not identified. Most dyslexics are never identified. They're smart, and they're thinking, why in the heck can't I read? They're angry, they're frustrated. So we see an increased dropout rate and an increased incarceration rate. And then we had the pandemic. So our school, because we know that our kids are behind anyway, and unfortunately we get very few first graders. Our smallest class are the first graders. We get kids, some in second grade, but a big influx in third, fourth, fifth, and sometimes middle school. So they're very far behind, and they don't feel good about themselves. They've been told they're lazy or they're stupid. So with the pandemic, we opened in July of 2020. We worked with Our Lady of the Lake and Pennington Biomedical. We did saliva testing on all our kids, and they were great, and it helped, but as you know, it was a contagious disease, so we still had a lot of absences. So our kids, just like every other school, have learning loss from their dyslexia and then compounded by the pandemic. What are we doing about that? Well, we, just like I'm sure everybody on the panel will say, you try to use your resources right. You try to use it. Specifically, what we're doing is trying to use a lot of money in after-school tutoring. Also, looking at attendance, because attendance has changed since the pandemic. And how can we help and get these kids in the school? So I would say that for us, we do what we know works. We have small class sizes, 6 to 1 in reading and math and writing. Our teachers are trained for 2 years. But we're also specifically looking and addressing attendance, classroom management, and we have another partnership with Our Lady of the Lake and the social workers to really meet this emotional needs of our children. She put the stop sign up, so I'm going to stop. But I thank you, and I'm hoping some people are interested, and we have a whole table of women that can, if you're interested in helping.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next panelist is Dr. Natasha Witten. Those of you who attend our church know her as Tasha Witten. She's our senior pastor's better half, other half, whichever half. Dr. Witten is a teacher. She used to be at Southeastern University. Now she's at Baton Rouge Community College. So we typically think about the pandemic and how it affects young children. But you are teaching, college-age folks. So talk to us a little bit about how, what kind of effects, or how teaching worked at the college level and how the pandemic affected that.
Sure. So it was interesting for me to move during the pandemic from one higher education institution to another, because there were very different student bodies at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond versus Baton Rouge Community College. The way that they dealt with the pandemic was also very different. Southeastern closed in March of 2020 and was fully reopened in August of 2020. So only a few months there. We went back in masks in August, and most of our students came back. In fact, I remember running out of housing that fall. Here I was thinking, Oh, no. We ran out of housing. I remember having students calling me from Baker, from Central, and saying, I need to drop my classes because I registered thinking I would have a place on campus and I don't have transportation from Baker to Hammond, so I'm going to have to change my schedule. So it was very shocking, and in October of 2020, I moved from that position to Baton Rouge Community College, which was completely shut down. So I moved from being masked and in the classroom to sitting at home behind a computer, and BRCC remained closed until August of 2021. And when it reopened with much smaller numbers, which seemed to be because in the 2020-2021 school year, many of the BRCC students had found work or other obligations that now made it even more challenging for them to get back to the face-to-face classroom. Even though we would hear that there was a desire on the part of the student to be in that face-to-face classroom, it just wasn't possible. And in trying to put together classes that were full, met the size requirements, again and again, online seemed to become the preference. And I'd like to say, as an online educator, I began teaching online in the 1990s. I think it's important that we separate online education from pandemic education because there is specific training and a very different way of teaching online than you would teach face-to-face. So we do not have online education in the pandemic. We have very well-trained face-to-face teachers who were suddenly given a few lessons and told they were now online faculty. And they desperately want to be face-to-face faculty. Just before I came, was texted by a faculty member who said, I'm just really missing the face-to-face classroom. And I said, come join me in the Pathways program where I'm teaching ninth graders history at Liberty High School, and they're all there in the classroom. So this fall, it's great. I think in K through 12, there's actually probably been a bit more of a bounce back than so far there has been in college, except with the traditional 18 to 24-year-olds. The 18 to 24-year-olds seem to be mostly back on campus, but at campuses where we serve much more non-traditional students, much wider age ranges, we're still seeing students that are, for better or worse, taking in this online environment, and of course that's going to affect things.
I'm looking at my timekeeper. How are we doing on time? Oh, lots of time. Okay. All right. So did you see students, you talked about housing issues and stuff with kids coming back, but were there deficiencies? Like, have you seen kids coming to school that are missing something because they went through pandemic?
So all I've been
Education.
thinking since I was invited, I think originally this was scheduled for June. So sometime last May or so, Carol Ann asked me to start thinking about learning loss. And I'm an academic, so I went straight to the literature to see, well, how are we defining learning loss? What are we calling it? How many of you out there would say you suffered from learning loss this week? Right? What are some things you would say you lost? Like where you put your keys, right? Like those are memory issues. So then I got really in the weeds about what's the difference between memory and learning? Why are we talking about loss when what we're really saying is they never got the skills to begin with, right? That's what we're saying. I have spent days, weeks, and months trying to figure out if it's possible to learn how to read and then forget how to read. And I can't find anything out there, right? Once you get the skill, you keep the skill. You may not develop it to the level that you want because of lack of practice, but you don't lose the skill. So when we talk about changes in students, I don't think we're talking about changes in skill. I don't think we're talking about loss. I think we're talking about conditioning. We're talking about soft skills, right? We're talking about the ability to sit for longer periods of time without reaching for an electronic device. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, all of us, regardless of our age, lost that ability during the pandemic. I will still find myself happily reading a book and I'll reach for my phone and then I'm thinking, I don't want this. I don't even know why it's here. So I'm spending a lot of time again with my ninth graders, doing what are the soft skills we need here? We need to read for prolonged periods of time. We need to know how to retrieve and locate information successfully using the tools that are available to us. We need to practice the skills that we already have. We need to think about critical thinking. We need to be independent, right? My kids started out before reaching EBR in some Montessori classrooms, especially my older two, which are very much about preparing a learning environment. And we had many of our kids, many of our older adults and students in unprepared learning environments. And we want to bring them back to prepared learning environments and really emphasize those skills. So I think loss is probably a bit of a misnomer, but certainly we have skill issues that we can address, I think, very well.
Thank you. Okay. Can I ask one quick question?
Okay.
I believe you started working more with pre-K.
Yes,
So
early
talk just a little
childhood.
bit about what brought you there.
In 40 seconds. So I was, when I moved to BRCC, I am very much a interdisciplinary. My undergrad degree, if you look at my bio, is biology. Then I went into literature. Then I have a PhD in history. So I thought I had covered everything, and I got to BRCC, and they handed me the early childhood program and the teaching program, and I said, let me learn. And what I discovered, particularly in early childhood, is that our pathways are not clear. Our transfer credit is confusing. You can speak to my friend Monica Brown from the YMCA about her stack of professional development, but when she goes into an academic environment, doesn't translate into any coursework. We all know there's a pay differential, but there's also an education differential that I'm really passionate about, because I think our early childhood educators are some of the most prepared and educated and professionally developed folks that we have out there. We really need to invest in them in salaries, but we also need to show progression from an associate's degree to a bachelor's degree onto a master's, specifically in early childhood, not just elementary education. So see me if you want to talk about that more, because I would love to talk about it more.
Right. Thank you so much. Okay, our next panelist will be Dr. Narcisse. Dr. Narcisse is the superintendent of our schools. And if I'm not mistaken, you came on board about right before this all started. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, go ahead and adjust how
So I'm going to follow the pattern that everybody else followed, just in terms of what I walked into. So I became the proud superintendent of EBR. I believe it was in January. I arrived in Louisiana from Washington, D.C. And it was interesting to watch how the dynamics are from one city on how they respond to another community on how they respond. And during that learning loss, during the same time, pretty much all the schools across the country were stopping learning. And I can recall we're in DC trying to figure out getting laptops as quickly as possible to kids, feeding kids who rely on us to eat food. I remember, so I was responsible for all the middle and high schools. We had all these complexities that we were going on. And as we transitioned to come, when I got here, those were some of the first things that ran in my mind. What are we doing in EBR around that? How are we helping families to cope to being teachers at home? When you walked into classrooms in EBR, you had teachers teaching kids on a screen. We call it simulcasting is the educational language of it. And then also teaching kids live. And also how do they feel safe to be able to walk around with this virus around, to kind of getting through those things. And then the other part that nobody, if you don't really recall, is before the pandemic, we had challenges around things like literacy already. We had challenges around keeping kids around extra programs in school, right? And depending on what part of the community you're in and what kind of wraparound services and supports you have, different communities had different support structures, right? So here's what I tell folks all the time. I may be the superintendent, but it takes a village to do this work, right? So the first thing we tried to do as quickly as possible was to try to figure out what were the support systems, What were the after-school programs that they had? What were the initiatives that you had in communities? What were the churches you had that support some of these issues? What were the programs in churches that they had? We also tried to look at what were some of the programs that we were either paying for or not paying for to wrap around particular communities. And in our strategy around that, we then had to try to figure out how did principals manage on their own to try to figure out how to keep not only teachers continuing to teach how to read, write, and do arithmetic, but more importantly, how to help them make sure that teachers don't leave because of their own safety, right? And I think Dr. Witten put it best when she said, like, you know, most teachers in our school system, we have about 3,200 teachers in EBR. They are not online teachers. All they did was pretty much open up the laptop and repeat what they would do actually in person. And that is not online teaching. That's just you actually replacing what you do in person. And as we started looking at that, if you look at data, we also found out that children who were home, how they responded with learning to whether it's reading, writing, or some of their classwork, responded totally different than kids who were in person. And if we add one more layer to that, there was also this notion of parents who are trying to figure out, how am I going to make sure my child doesn't fall further behind than where they were already? That was kind of the picture, right? One thing Louisiana, I think, did tremendously well was we tried our best to keep kids in school as much as possible with safe protocols and those things. And there was a huge anxiety around that. And those protocols and the ways that we did that actually kind of helped a little bit because it gave people the opportunity to have kids actually have a much more physical connection in terms of seeing folks live in person to do some instruction. But folks, that was tremendously challenging. And so that's kind of what I walked into when I got here. But however, so let's pivot to things that we started to do. So as we started now to moving kids into schools, we had to think about a couple of things. Number one, we still had anxiety with families and parents who did not want to be in schools, so we've started up a virtual school. We had to do that as quickly as possible. That virtual school went from, when we started, I think it was almost 1,000-something kids. I think it's gone much more down because families feel more comfortable to come back. We had to also think about what programs that we had to continue, extra support. All those components made a difference in what we were trying to do. And then we had to also map out a map for the children of Baton Rouge in terms of what did we see was important to get their learning together. And so I'm just going to walk you through 6 keys of things that we've done. So when I arrived, we did what they call a strategic plan. That's a fancy word for a roadmap. And under that roadmap, you have 4 categories: student achievement, professional development, providing better customer service, and then what we call is operational excellence, which is where you want the operation of the organization to do better. Well, under student achievement, based on our data, there were 6 things that we had to do under student achievement to do better for the district. Number 1 is expand early childhood education. I think I heard things of Dr. Katz. One of you talked about that, or Dr. Wynn talked about expansion of early childhood education. We start kids too late here in school. And you don't wait till kindergarten to get them in school. They should be in school from 0 to 4. I think Hiller Moore talked about prenatal. That's something that we talked about. How do we expand more kids early as possible? If they're in school earlier, then they do better when they get to kindergarten, right? So what we did was we said expand more seats to early child education. The second thing we talked about that we had to also expand is get children ready at kindergarten, because you need a foundation in order for you to move up grades. Our goal has been to try to shift our community not to see single schools and single grades, but to see the full cradle to career pipeline for kids from the time that they're born all the way until they finish and go into college and career jobs. The third thing we talked about is getting kids to read at the 3rd grade level. Why the 3rd grade? If children do not read in 3rd grade, you pretty much not only determine what their profession is, but if you're coming from a much more challenging community, you would hear this word called the prison pipeline. They base prisons based on 3rd grade reading scores. The 4th is middle to high school transition. It's important for how a child transitions from middle to high school in order for them to do well. And number 5 and 6 was accelerating children in what they call industry-based certifications, also giving them opportunity to take advanced courses, whether that's advanced placement, dual enrollment, because you want to save kids and families money for school. And those were kind of our approach and strategies that we've said we're going to put dollars into, and also provide opportunity for us to create supports, put funding in, and more importantly, help to train around those factors. I could talk so much more, but she told me to stop, so.
Okay, thank you so much. And there are going to be questions. I know there will. So, so we will pass you the microphone when it's question time. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the next panelist we have is Mr. Lucas Spielvogel. I have no idea why I want to say Fogelspiel. I've said it wrong all night long, and it's right in front of me. But Mr. Lucas Spielvogel is the director of BRIC, which is the Baton Rouge Youth Coalition. This is an agency that works with high school students, and I'm going to let Mr. Spielvogel tell us all about it. And how you all were helping, and then we've got some parents and students who are going to come talk too.
I'm gonna come down because I feel like when you follow this group of experts, you have to do something a little different to distinguish yourself. Plus, we're midway through a 2-hour program, and I think we don't want to have too much more learning loss. So I want to really connect with you. So my name is Lucas Spielvogel, and for the last going on my 11th year, I've been the executive director of the Baton Rouge Youth Coalition, which is a grassroots, homegrown program that exists outside of school and focuses on supporting high school students with 2 things: learning, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second, and college access and persistence. I'm very lucky, we're all lucky tonight to be joined by one of our fellows, Tyvion, and his mother, Mrs. Woods. So I'm very proud of how BRIC handled the pandemic. March 13th was a day that will live in infamy forever. And I remember being very proud that BRIC was maybe the or one of the first organizations actually on March 13th to email all of our folks and say, we're going virtual. We just felt like at that time what was needed was predictability and consistency. And within a week from that time, we had pivoted to virtual using a combination of Blackboard and Zoom, and we had doubled our program hours from 3 a day to 6 a day to try to make up for the lack of distance learning that was happening as the school district was working incredibly hard to scale a solution. Over the last 3 years, we've primarily been virtual, and during that time, we've still maintained a 100% rate of our students matriculating to a post-secondary commitment, with the great majority, more than 90% of them each year going to 4-year colleges, but the rest of them going to 2-year colleges, technical, and also the military. So while I'm really proud of how BRIC responded, I'm also aware that, kind of like Dr. Witten pointed out, the pandemic, what it really did, it didn't invent new problems, it identified existing ones and it magnified them. And so we saw that we didn't have the tech infrastructure that we needed. We saw that our teachers did not possess the very specific skill set of virtual instruction that is completely different from in-person instruction. And so many other things. We saw that this is a multi-layered problem, and frankly, we all know that it's rooted in hundreds of years of systemic injustice that really shone through during this pandemic, where folks of color and low-income folks experienced the brunt of this hit. While this is a multifaceted problem, I want to drill down on one specific thing I think that this pandemic has elucidated, and it's something that Dr. Witten talked about. It's called self-regulated learning. And so in our schools here and across the country, especially in our most under-resourced and most underperforming schools, we have conditioned students, you use the word conditioning, we've conditioned students to be more focused on completion than mastery. And so when they're in their classrooms, so much of their academic record is based on their behavior or based on the homework that they turn in or just their general compliance, as opposed to their demonstrating that they're mastering concepts. And mastery can't only happen in the classroom. You as a student have to be able to drive your own learning. And that's the future. We're moving to virtual learning. That's not going away. We're moving to asynchronous learning. Tavian, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that teenagers are learning more from TikTok, and I'm not making a joke. I'm dead serious. When a teenager now wants to learn something, they're not even going to YouTube. They're going to TikTok. And so how can we equip students with SRL skills, self-regulated learning? Self-regulated learning refers to a student's ability to plan, to set goals, to self-monitor, and to self-assess. These are things that feel nebulous, they may feel soft, and they are to an extent, as Dr. Wooden pointed out, but I also want to push and say I think they can be crystallized into something extremely concrete. And so at BRIC, we teach our students a 3-step process when it comes to studying: plan, monitor, and assess. Plan means that before you're jumping right into what you have to do to prepare for an assessment, you're taking time to think about, what do I have to learn? How long do I have to study? What resources do I need to learn this material? As you go into actually studying, you're thinking about thinking, metacognition. You're thinking about, am I on target? Am I engaged? Or like Dr. Witten said, am I passively reading the words while nothing is being retained? And then finally, a lot of the times, I've been doing this work for 12 years, and I can't tell you the number of students who I've asked, when do you know you're ready for a test? And they say, I don't know, I just kind of read it and I go through it and I feel it. I just feel like I'm ready and I go to bed. Well, I'm like, hey, that's not good enough. You have to prove that you know it before you go into the real thing. You know, Usain Bolt, he didn't run his first world record time in the Olympics. He knew, I'm pretty good at this. I'm going to go run this race and win this gold. And so we want our students to be trained to ace the test before the test. And so those are the skills that we've worked on at BRIC, and I believe that's why our fellows have been really successful during the pandemic. We saw on average a 3.5 per student gain on the ACT, and this was all through virtual instruction. And so again, just to wrap up, while I think that we all know that this pandemic has been a multifaceted, multi-layered problem that's rooted in so many years of our country's own injustices, we also can affect change by helping our students reclaim control of their own learning and not necessarily be dependent on great teachers, even though we also would love to have that too. So thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to answering questions.
And we've got some parents and students that are going to talk. Actually,
Yes.
well, yeah, come on, bring this down. So we're going to bring up, I'm going to say this wrong, Kiamethea Woods, and her son is Tavian Fairley. And what we'd like to hear about is, what was it like to be a parent during the pandemic, and what was it like to be a student during the pandemic?
So good evening. Being a parent is not easy as it is, especially during the pandemic. Me personally, I had a child in elementary, I had a child in middle school and high school. And to say the least, it was tough. Not only with them transitioning to the online learning, but in addition to that, I'm thinking, well, we're at work during the day. Who's going to be home with the children, you know, making sure they're logged in and, you know, doing these things. Fortunately enough, I was able to take my work home, so we had a fix for that. Honestly, initially, all of my children's grades went down, and it happened immediately. And I knew it wasn't because they didn't know it, because I have honor roll students. I know that they're capable. I know that that wasn't the thing, but it's a new environment. We're all learning it. It was quite frustrating at times, but and then I also had to realize that this is new for the instructors. They're doing what they know how to do the best they know how. It was tough. I will say I am definitely grateful that Tavian was able to be a part of BRIC, because I would listen in and take those skills to my other children, and the things that they did truly did work. I honestly think there should be some partnership between brick and mortar schools, even, beyond the high school students, because the skills do work. Um, it was tough, guys. At the very least, it was tough. But we got accustomed to it. We had no choice. We had to get accustomed to it. My speech would be, this is just what it is. This is what we have to do. And we figured out ways to make it work. And we got our grades back to where I knew they should be in the beginning. But it was tough. It was a challenge. But we made it through. We're making it through. I just had my middle son to be in quarantine for 5 days. School just started. And I'm like, I can't come home this time. So we had to work through that. And now it's to the point, initially when you would be sent home for quarantine, when we were doing the hybrid learning, you would still be able to get the virtual instruction. Well, now that's not an option either. So he literally was just out of school missing lesson for an entire week at the beginning of school. So there are still challenges, challenges that I feel it's important that not only the teacher and the school system, the after-school programs, us as a community of parents, we have to work together. I am delighted to be here. This is an honor. I've learned a lot. I have things I'm going to take home, structures I'm going to change that the kids may not be pleased with, but it's what needs to be done.
Now, originally when we switched to virtual learning, of course, me being a kid and not liking school, I was excited. But after 2 weeks in, and I saw that was the first time I had anything close to a D, and I just went into shock. Like, I was completely out of it, especially like those first few weeks when we didn't have like the proper materials, because my mom, of course, she got us like laptops and stuff. But like that wasn't the only issue. Of course, like sometimes teachers couldn't access correctly, or there were too many people on the Google Meet, so we had a lot of backtracks in the first few weeks. But of course, as we got on, those problems got fixed. But even then, it was less engaging, especially when you're like at a place where you usually go to after school, take naps and be comfortable. It's hard to stay focused. And me having 2 other siblings at the time at home, of course, I'm trying to make sure they do what they have to do, trying to make sure like the volume is good, the Wi-Fi is working. So it was a lot to deal with at that time. And when I originally went back, whenever they started doing hybrid, I did start doing better. I had a noticeable change, but it was still kind of different because the classes were pretty much barren. I think my largest class had 9 people in it. And that was my 8th grade year. And when we went to 9th grade, it was a huge change because besides me going to high school, I went to Baton Rouge High. So I was nervous because I've heard that school is hard and most people don't get past their first year. Gladly I did. And that was the year my mom took me to break, and it really did help because I am horrible at studying. I'm usually able to just get the material in class and go take the test and ace it, but I think on my first test, I got very close to a C. And so when I went to break, my mentor, Miss Bree, she asked me what I was having trouble with, and she did everything she possibly could. She got me a tutor who knew most of the subjects and even helped me like learn like studying schedules that I still use to this day. So if it wasn't for them, then I probably wouldn't have stayed there for too long. And they even helped outside of that. Like Miss Bree, she helped me look for like schools that had wrestling scholarships, as I'm on a wrestling school at that team. She knows that I want to go into engineering, so she helped me look at programs that had that type of stuff. And like my mom said, I do wish it would get passed on to like middle and elementary school kids because they could really help a lot.
Okay, thank you so much. We've got another mother and son duo coming up, Peter Mingo and Miss Erica Williams. And we're going to just ask the same question. Tell us a little bit about what it was like parenting during COVID and what it was like studenting, and then talk a little bit about Brick has helped. Thanks.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Erica Williams, and this is my son, Peter Mingo Jr. Safety first. I'm a single mom. I'm also a registered nurse. And I have my hands in the entertainment industry as well, multifaceted. But as far as the pandemic is concerned, because I'm dealing with two total entities, so, getting adjusted with my patient population and working and, thinking about safety and even coming home to my child was a big concern because I didn't want anything to get, translated over to him. But thank God we made it through that. As far as school and education-wise, my biggest concern during the pandemic was the lack of information that he may not have received. And then our experience from elementary school, it really came about just test, leap test scores, leap test scores, leap test scores. So in my head, it's like they're not in school, when it comes time for state testing, like, is he gonna acquire all the information he needs to pass? So that was like one of my biggest concerns. I'm a drill sergeant when it comes to education. So, and he knows that, I drill. So it wasn't, I can't say that I wasn't too concerned about him being able to navigate at home. He's very computer savvy. I always kind of felt like I was the teacher too. So even though they were on lockdown, I felt like it was my job to take over the teaching part. So I have like multiple programs, iExcel, Khan Academy, and I'll do my own little outline for him, but it was so stressful. Honestly, I didn't even get a chance to do that with him, but he maintained on his own. So those years of getting on his nerves actually paid off. So he did relatively well, honest, but it was a big concern. I was really worried that will he get all the information that he need for 7th and 8th grade, when they took LEAP tests last year. It's a cumulative of what they have learned plus new information. So I was really, really worried. But we made it, we survived. He stayed COVID-free, so that was a blessing. And I'll let him tell how it affected him at home, which I didn't even know. That was the crazy thing about it. And I have this thing I do with Peter called a heart check. So, are we happy in the inside? Is something going on? Something you need to talk about? I'm very big on that because they're exposed to so much. So I try to keep that open line of communication and make sure we are both on one accord. So I'll let you tell him about that part.
Sorry if I stutter, I'm a little bit nervous, but when virtual first came, I really wasn't adjusted to it, you could say. I really didn't like virtual because at first it was very hard for me to adjust at being home and learning online and having a cam up and do all these different things. I was really just used to getting up, waking up, preparing just to go to school, and then I got to do the same thing except just do my work in my room, which I pretty wasn't used to. And I feel like the only bad thing that I had in virtual was lack of paying attention in class and not focusing, and I just kept dozing off. I was very sleepy. I pretty much was just sleepy all the time. I really wasn't used to it, and it took like a long time for me to adapt to it. After like a couple of months, I pretty much started to like it for a little bit, but then I came to a part where I got lonely, and I felt the need that I needed to interact with somebody face to face, and I only got I only have 2 friends, and my friends are the only ones that I see at school, and I really wasn't used to just being at home and just having to do all that. So, scared.
You're not scared?
So I have a question. Did that make you appreciate going back to school?
Yes, ma'am. The only thing that I'm working back on is learning how to communicate with people again, because after being in quarantine for a year, almost a year, year and a half, yeah. I really didn't know how to associate with anyone when I returned, so that was the only bad thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
I did forget to mention one thing. We are new to the BRIC program, and we're just not starting. And Miss Monica Bradshear, we have close relationship with her. And she's been along with this journey with me for, I think he was maybe in the 4th grade or whatever. And she's been a great mentor, a lot of great insight. And, you know, she had mentioned it to us a while back, and I wouldn't apply it, but it wasn't time. Like, he was still, like, in, I think, 5th going to 6th grade or something like that. So the thing that really encouraged me to want him to become a part of that program is that I work 24/7. And it's hard. It's really hard. I know I have the tools to help him prepare as far as college, but it's the time, you know, being able to research different, you know, scholarships and, you know, things I would want to do, but because I work so much, it's really hard. And so, you know, she gave me so much insight and allowed me to, you know, look at this, just the data that was collected from the success of the program. So we're really looking forward to that. And meeting some new people, because like you said, like I didn't know that being, I don't like to say isolated, but being at home like that, a lot of those kids dealt with a lot of that or whatever, and a lot of parents didn't even know, you know, that it affected them like that. So we're looking forward to that. I'm excited to be a part of the BRIC program. We just did orientation. We're going to start this week, but we'll definitely be there next week.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I've got a few questions, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand the microphone over here, and that way whoever is answering, y'all can share that. So we're going to start with talking a little bit about truancy. So how prevalent is truancy before the pandemic or during the pandemic or now after the pandemic? And then the follow-up to that is, what message can we help parents to develop a sense of the importance of getting their children to school? So I don't know if Dr. Narcisse wants to start, and I'm sure there are other folks who'd like to chime in.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we've had coming out of the pandemic is kids coming back to school. And right now, even in our own school in East Baton Rouge, and I don't have the exact number, but our high schools right now, we have, I don't have the exact number, but it's almost 70% of kids are coming to school, but we have, if you minus 70% plus by the 100%, you have almost X amount of kids that are not coming. And our biggest challenge that we have is just getting them there. Kids tend to learn a whole lot more if they are present, right? So one of the challenges has been is getting kids to school, especially in particular communities where we've had already a challenge around getting them staying engaged and connecting into those areas. So when you look at some of the challenges you saw when Hiller was showing about whether it's the crime rates and those things, there are particular communities where what the pandemic has done is made kids become even more disconnected, right? And our biggest problem has been trying to get not only the child to come back, but also helping some of the families support the child to come back. Because as you heard one of the moms here, if you're working 24 hours a day, if, you know, depending on where you are socioeconomically or what resources you have, you know, you need to have somebody monitoring the child, those things. And sometimes students at those areas, they don't come to school. And that has shown a lot of impact on performance in schools. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is we worked with not only ourselves as a school system, we have child welfare and attendance and some folks that go and try to knock on doors, but we've had to get help from other government agencies and coordinate with mayor's office and others to be able to figure out ways not only trying to find where the child is, but more importantly, when you do find them, how do you keep them engaged to keep coming to school? And those are different sets of issues that you have to solve in that problem. And so that's been currently what our strategy has been. Before, when I came on to EBR, it was a challenge already in particular schools at particular communities around truancy. And the pandemic has exacerbated that. And so we're trying to be much more aggressive. One of the conversations we're talking about collectively, even as we start talking about our partners, is if we can do some type of attendance campaign or some type of hook to keep the child coming into the school, because it's going to take a community approach for us to solve that problem and just not the school system alone. And that's a challenge that we have to figure out together collectively.
Did anyone else want to address, Ms. Alexander, did you have anything on truancy? Yeah.
So Bernard Terrace was one of the school populations where we did struggle with attendance. So we were in partnership with TASK. One thing that I found when we returned face-to-face, we still had children that even though they may have been virtual that year, they were still not logging on. They were still pretty much absent. And so I found that a lot of those children, I felt as if they slipped through the cracks, for lack of better words. So we had, at that point, we had TASK assisting us with going to houses, and but that was an issue beforehand. So I'm really interested, especially this year, that we're pretty much 100% back. How is that looking now? Because I think that was an easy way for parents and even children to feel a little more comfortable with being at home and having some resistance of coming back to school.
And what is TASK?
TASK is it's a partnership with actually Hilla Moore's office, where you would actually have those parent meetings with parents to see what are some barriers that's preventing the child from actually getting to school. So it was a lot of wraparound services that TASK offered for our parents of students with, that had those truancy issues. And we found, of course, it wasn't a child issue, it was an adult issue and a family issue. So just being sure that we were providing those parents with those resources that they needed.
Are there enough resources to reach all of the parents who are not sending their kids to school?
So I'm gonna say this because this has been something that I've been telling folks since I arrived to Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge is not a resource issue we have. Our issue is a coordination issue. We are a very rich and resource community. We have many partners. We have many folks who want to invest on improving the school system and the community as a collective. The challenge is within our communities we have different schools of thought on how they think about it, coordination, different ways we think about alignment to use dollars for that. And so one of the strategies that we have been trying to do at the school system is to coordinate partners in one space. So one example, I see my friend over there who runs the Gardere Village, Doc over there. We created a Baton Rouge Area Youth Network. And Baton Rouge Area Youth Network is over, I think I want to say it's over 80 plus partners now. And if with those 80 plus partners, we have now targeted various communities across, we've broken up EBR into 5 regions. And in those 5 regions, to help target particular communities on how we can kind of solve particular problems, whether that's extra tutoring, or whether that's feeding students, or whether that's different type of services to bring back. And so we've had these partners here for a while. But what has been the challenge is they've never worked together to target various communities. And I want to say one other thing too. I think that I always hear, there's always this notion that one community needs more than another. I tell folks every community needs something, it's just a little bit different. Because just as much as you may have in a community where there's much higher poverty, people need something. Well, families there were two family household kids who had resources, but those parents didn't know how to teach kids either on how to do stuff online. They struggled too, because they would send the kid to school and go to work, right? And so we have to really think about how we use resources in a coordinated way and how we think about supporting every single community in our parish to actually help our community elevate together. And that's why we've also done strategies around trying to engage with faith-based groups. We've just started a process where we've engaged over 200 faith leaders with us to kind of help us because, many people go to where? Church, right? And they try to figure out how do they work together, to maximize the services that they have at church. And if you go to any community in Baton Rouge, that's a very main construct. Usually what ends up happening is people go to faith-based groups after the problem happens, right? So the question that we said was, why not bring them to help us problem solve in the beginning, right? And so these are some strategies that we're trying to do differently that EBR has not always done. We have not always been the best at bringing folks to beginning the problem in the beginning to problem solve. But again, as I tell folks, we are very rich in resource, but if we coordinate better and we move in one direction, our impact will be way tremendous. And I will argue we have a lot of resources that can solve these problems, but we have to be okay that we may have to tap into different partners strategically to help us solve particular problems.
Terrific. Thank you. All right, my next question has to do with pre-K, and we've mentioned pre-K, and I see Dr. Witten's eyes lighting up already because she wants to talk more about pre-K. Woo! So how far are we from having a universal pre-K? What is the difference between pre-K and Head Start? And
I'll just say that what we're doing, what EBR is doing to bring the 3-year-old classrooms in, I don't know if you're aware of this initiative where EBR elementary schools are partnering with daycares nearby, like London Bridge, bringing the 3-year-olds in to the elementary school, creating that partnership and bridge. Very exciting stuff. I don't think we hear about it often enough. I have been actively for the past couple of years hiring adjuncts to teach our care and development of young children students, and have one of my adjuncts, Ashley Washington, was part of that initiative. And so, again, I think you're exactly right. I think we sometimes end up duplicating. I think we've got a lot of resources out there, and we just don't hear or connect with them all. I've also spent a lot of time with Dr. Cartina Roberts of Head Start. She's been in her position for about a year, heading up the capillary Head Start, and has great resources, great ideas. She actually put all of her her program directors and her assistant directors into our organization and administration class at BRCC last semester because she wanted to do professional development. And rather than bring in an outsider, why not use the local community college course as part of that professional development? So those kind of partnerships, I think, will help us to resource expanding. Again, there are these opportunities for 3-year-olds, opportunities for 4-year-olds, and many of them, scholarship, lots of resource there. We just need to connect them to the community.
And can you explain exactly what Head Start is? How is that different from pre-K, or is it pre-K?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, one is Head Start is actually under the mayor's office, and it's actually not under EBR. So we actually partner and work to support them, as we have been coordinating more than we ever have before in the city to try to work together to educate the children through our pipeline. But it's same sets of strategies, trying to get kids to read, write. There's a whole curriculum that they go through, but that's where the difference is. It's under one division, but we've worked closer with the mayor's office as a school system as we ever have before. There's an early childhood network where we've brought various partners together, which has been new, and we've tried the micro centers, as you heard Dr. Witten talk about. Let me give you some numbers. These are going to be estimates. I'm always a little fearful about numbers because people want to say this is the exact number, but I want to just give you just a little taste of early childhood in terms of our parish. When we talk about early childhood, we're talking about from the ages of 0 to 4. So I always tell folks it's 0 to 4. So kids start off when the time they're born. They usually go to daycare, and then we usually get them at age 3 or 4. But we service, what we do really well in EBR is we service about 94% of the kids who are at risk are actually in our system, and I want to say it's around ages 4 years old. But when you look at the total numbers, if you look at all of the numbers of early childhood across the parish, you have a total of about 29,000 kids. 29,000 kids that should be in an early childhood program. We are probably in our own network only servicing, let's say, just above 5,000 and change, right? And then when you look at the amount of at-risk, there's probably almost 18,000 that's in that space. Now, we are right now working with the Louisiana Policy Institute, who works in the Early Childhood Network, where we're creating a strategic plan on how we can be aggressive around solving this problem. If we don't figure out how we're going to get kids into schools early, they're going to have challenges going into kindergarten and moving up the pipeline. And if they don't feel good about the work that they're doing, you're talking about learning loss, you then have kids go off track, and then what happens when they're off track and they're not connected to school, you then have the numbers that Hiller shows you. Everybody with me? So this is all interconnected in a way from cradle to career pipeline. And so we, unlike other cities, have the possibility to think about how we're going to fund something like that. Some cities have done it in different ways, but if we don't start thinking strategically like that, then our biggest challenge will be we will continue to have various gaps that we walk through right now. We can't think about solving problems when the problem arises. We have to be preventative in our strategy and our approach.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to mention that?
No, but I think there's a follow-up. I don't know if we...
Okay. Do your questions on the card? Okay. All right. Is your question specifically about pre-K? Okay, well. All right. If anyone else has questions, write them down, wave them up. Okay. So how do we make sure families are aware of the resources that are available? So how do we make sure those who are eligible for Head Start or whatever get in there?
So I guess I'll take that one. So one of the strategies that we've been working tremendously hard is through our communication approach. There are forms of communication. We have communication that happens through our social media platforms, and that's for people who are digitally literate, right? But our biggest challenge has been we have to work with partners like yourself to try to see how we can get out more into communities, work with Brain, trying to help us figure out those partners that get to go out in communities and say, here's the offerings of what we're doing, here's the pieces of what we're doing, because what we found out is partners are more connected to particular communities than the school system. What people see in the school system is that they have to navigate, right? We're about 41,000 plus students, 80 semi-schools, and what you find with families, they navigate through a school well depending on what their own experiences have been. So if you've had a bad experience with school, you don't know how to navigate, and also you don't know how to advocate, right? So what we've been trying to do is figure out ways to not only try to close that gap, but figure out how we can go out to communities. And that has been something that we have not always been the best at doing. And our hope is, as we have this new approach around community engagement, is to start bringing in different groups, whether it's faith-based, whether it's partners, different partners in various parts of the city, whether it's North Baton Rouge, Mid-City, or South Baton Rouge, and also trying to see if we can bring them with actual applications and certain things to help them fill things out, because you also have families who don't feel comfortable because they may not be literate themselves, right? So there's a lot of layers to this, but we cannot do that with partners around. So one of our goals is trying to educate various partners across the city. Here's how the process is, here's who you call, here's how you do this, and then here's where we can go out to you and try to connect and actually do it for you.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, pardon me, Dr. Cassidy, this next one, I've got three questions about dyslexia here, so I know you made an impact. And the questions all have to do with how do we, is it possible, or how early is it possible to diagnose students? How early are we diagnosing students? And you know, your school is especially for dyslexic kids who aren't there, what's going on in the regular school system. And before you answer, I want to just take a moment of personal privilege. I was a reading friend at Bernard Terrace, and my reading friend, I was pretty sure something wasn't right, because in the first grade, we would go through the list: cat, fat, hat, mat, and she never caught that there was a pattern. And so I mentioned to the teacher, something's not right. And then in second grade, I mentioned to the teacher, something's not right. And by third grade, it was like, something's not right. And I think she had been tested, and it was, you know, so I'm very curious to hear. I was a middle school art teacher. I don't know how to teach reading, but it became obvious to me just from that simple hat, fat, cat, mat, not catching it, that there was a problem. And maybe I'm simplifying, but it seemed like there was a problem.
No, actually, you're really smart, because one of the things that the dyslexic child has a problem with is rhyming, because they're not hearing those sounds. And so, unfortunately, we have data in the state, and you put me sort of in a bad place, because I'm not trying to slam anybody. And what I look is at the federal legislation and the state legislation. But if you look at the state, we have reporting data now that's mandated on dyslexia reporting. And we had the first one out last fall. We'll have the second one. And that's if they're on an IEP or a 504 plan. And it is less than 1% in every parish in the state. And even if you don't want to believe the science that it's 20%, and it's 10%, you start understanding we're not serving these kids. We can identify children at the end of kindergarten. I have been talking to the department for 10 years. They thought I was crazy then. Some of them think I'm crazy now, but that's what the science says. We cannot do it earlier. We have signs that we can say, like this rhyming that you picked up, because they start doing the rhymes when they're 3 and 4. Failure to remember the alphabet. They may know it one day, they don't know it the next. They may read a sentence one day and they don't remember it the next, or they may not even remember it 4 hours later. And it's really puzzling for a parent. You're like, you're not paying attention. So, and I don't want to take up all the time, but we don't, our next piece that we will introduce in the session is a valid screener for dyslexia for the state. Because if you were my patient, and I had a patient here, and I told you that you needed a mammogram to pick up early breast cancer, then you're expecting that that mammogram has the scientific validity to pick it up so that you don't get breast cancer. And that is not what our screeners are. And to me, it is an equivalent screener, because the outcomes that we've talked about for the dyslexic kids are so severe and it's so prevalent.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Narcisse or Ms. Alexander, did you want to say anything about how we deal with that, or what happens in the school?
And traditionally, and I don't know what has changed in the last year, but it has been identified late, normally in second grade, and screeners not being accurate. So parents would say, and we would hear it a lot, at home, we just went over this. They can do this. They can do this. And so we just not having the expertise just as teachers, because you don't get that specialized training to actually know those signs or what have you. So that has been a struggle, and I've honestly had to refer some students to Key Academy, and they were very successful because I understood the limitations that I had it as a school principal, so when we had, and it was right down the street, so it was very beneficial for those students because we learned strategies and things of that nature, but we just weren't where we needed to be. So to better assist the students, we were able to just refer them to Key Academy and get them the help that they actually needed.
I do want to say one thing, because I think somebody mentioned about the third grade. There's legislation this past session, and it's going to be introduced again. If anybody wants to help me, because having a third grader repeat the third grade is not the right way, okay? We know that these kids, the reading process that we talked about, it starts with oral language. This is at 2 and 3 years old. To make a third grader repeat for the third grade is, for one, way too late, and it is not going to solve what the underlying issue is. So if anybody wants to help me, I'm really very passionate about this. I don't think the legislation will pass, but what I would like is for us to get to a point where we're really looking at why the child isn't reading. And we can do that with a clinical history and with testing, because that's the only way we're going to be able to give them what they specifically need, like you would if you had a cancer. You're not going to get any chemotherapy or any treatment. You're going to get it specific. And again, I see medicine and school, the byproduct, as equivalent.
And the legislation you're speaking of is something that would mandate screening at an early age, or what would the legislation do?
That's our screening, which we will push for the end of kindergarten. The legislation that I'm against is to make a struggling reader that is struggling at the end of third grade repeat the third grade. That is, I can't believe we're really talking about it. I mean, that was like what people talked about 50 years ago, but we know. So, and I get people want to help, but that's not the solution.
If I could just add one thing to that, because literacy is a big deal for us in our district. Just to quantify what Doc said there. So remember that from pre-K to third grade, you are learning to read. From third grade on, you are reading to learn. Right? So one of the strategies that we've made as a major focus is to increase literacy throughout the school district, and that's at all grade levels. We just worked with the mayor on their joint task force, which included partners like LSU, Southern, various experts we had here in the city, and some national partners, and we created what they call the Literacy Blueprint. It helps the community and different stakeholders to think about how they help children to read in the school system. If you go to our website, www.ebrschools.org, we actually have it online. We can click and go through there. We can also share with you here. Karana can have her bring maybe 20 or 30 you can pass out to folks. But we're trying our best to get that across the community, because there are particular strategies that are in there that help to be very specific. What you can do as a partner to help a child read more, what you can do as a business partner to help how the child read more, what you can do as a parent at home to help a child to read more. If we don't start focusing on those things, it becomes a challenge. And a lot of the gap around with the reading wars has been more around, would you use whole language approach on how you teach reading, or phonemic awareness? And so there's this whole piece. So we worked with a lot of national partners on trying to help that. Some of these strategies are not brand new. We just, as a collective city, have never said, hey, this is what we're going to do collectively as a strategy. And what we're trying to do is work with our partners to do that. And so we'll try to get some for folks here so you can have as you engage with the community.
Terrific, thank you. All right, and then the last question is a perfect one to end up our evening. How can the local church help? What is your vision of a local church helping the school system? And this one says, how can a 70-year-old lady help? So I would love to hear some answers. I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from y'all.
You want to go? Okay. I have answers for all of those. I think if you're, how old is that person?
70.
70. Oh, that's even better.
And she specifically said, how can a 70-year-old lady help Brick? So don't pass it on.
So, Lucas, I'll pass it right next. So if you're 70 years old, there's this group called VIPS, if you see them over there. Go and join that group. Those folks have been awesome. It's great to live in a city where we have volunteers to help. So they do a lot of great work, volunteers in public schools. Dr. Bethany and their group do an awesome job to help us to kind of do that work. So I would say join that group. There's a lot of different initiatives around literacy and those things that you can help with homework and all those things. And so all you have to do is walk over to that table over there, and they will set you up. The second thing was, what was the second one?
What would be your vision of a local church helping the school system?
So we in the school system hired, we have folks that work under community engagement. I was just telling the pastor here that we have partnered now trying to get over 100 pastors that we've been starting to meet with, depending on wherever their congregations are, to help to be proactive as a school system to help try to talk through with their congregations about what we're doing and also see how they can fit these initiatives in their community approaches that every church does. And so that's kind of the work. So we would sign up that. I talked to, I don't see the pastor here, but I remember telling him, like, we are right now, have him join the group, and any of the youth pastors or folks that are here to be a part of this group that helps to get all of our initiatives out early. And more importantly, it tells how you help your congregation to help us do the work. We're partnering with, we're actually working with different professors across the country who's trying to model this, because as you know, there's always been this concern about church and state. But what you know that I tell folks is that, churches are a part of the community. They play a very huge part in people's lives and living. And so we have really embraced that at East Baton Rouge as a part of a strategy that we have to do. And so our goal would be to take the names and have you go and work with us in that as we kind of work through as being a part of your strategy as you go to your congregation's community.
Thank you. I'll start with the question about what can not only a 70-year-old woman, but anyone do to help BRIC. So BRIC is a program that is heavily driven by volunteerism. All of our students have, if not a one-to-one mentor, then a mentor that works with a small pod within the context of our program. So there will never be a time where a volunteer is asked to make a lesson plan or come in and determine what we're doing for the day. Everything is organized and happening within a BRIC session, and you are coming and applying your time and talents within that space. And so, as Dr. Narcisse said, VIPS is incredible. I'm 2 tables to my right, their left. I hope you'll stop by after to learn about our volunteer opportunities. It is a bigger commitment than a project-based. Similar to VIPS, it requires consistency, because we all know how important that is, not just for the academic gain, but the trust that you develop with whoever you're working with. So please do come over, we need you. I think that First United Methodist Church is an exemplar church of what it looks like for a faith community to reach into the community. We happen to be fortunate to be located just down the street. So we're located at the corner of Main and North 11th Street, so we're practically neighbors. And over the last 7 to 10 years, George, Monica, Henry, and so many other folks in this community have really treated us like that, like neighbors, making their resources available, making their spaces available. And so my recommendation for the question is going to be more focused on mindset. I think that we need to challenge ourselves around how we think about our most vulnerable community members. I think that too often we frame the problem in terms of it being their fault. I think we think about the challenges that they're experiencing, such as truancy or related issues, and we frame it as a personal choice, as opposed to looking at it in the context of poverty. And poverty is a policy choice. Poverty is a result of decades of our issues, and so I really want to challenge all of us, myself included, to continue to not hold responsible the very people who are actually the victims of poverty. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage folks to be more engaged in their students' learning and to encourage their to look out for the best information around pre-K or high school or college, but to think of it as a partnership as opposed to a talking to our community.
And I'll just say, looking around at all the 70-year-olds in the room, you're all already volunteering in 3 to 4 organizations that I'm aware of. So just keep up the good work.
Yes, and I would say that 70-year-old women are perfect because what a child needs is to read out loud. You can't really tell a child's reading if they're reading silently. And if they're called to read in the classroom, often if they're a struggling reader, they're embarrassed and they're not going to. So one, if you have a friendship with a child and you're with VIPS or any organization, and you can read with that child back and forth and let the child read out loud, one, you're going to help with their fluency, and two, you're going to identify some dyslexics. So I encourage you, and I thank you because I know you all do volunteer.
Well, and like Mr. Lucas, and I'm not going to try to say that last name, we have talked, I know Mr. John Smith and I have talked about how we can replicate the partnership that Bernard Terrace has with First United Methodist, just with it was massive, but having the Hype After School program that was just really a partnership between the church and the students at Bernard Terrace, where they were coming here Monday through Thursday, not only just having the academic help, but also some cultural experiences and gaining more social skills, but also providing parent nights and helping parents with things as simple as budgeting, some first-time home buyers experiences that they were able to help, and just with diets, just healthy eating for their children. So I think that I think First United Methodist has it figured out. It's just a matter of replicating many of the activities and initiatives that you guys had for the students at Bernard Terrace.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is perfect. We are timely. We don't even have the person here telling us to stop, and we're on time. So I think it was Dr. Narcisse that brought up it takes a village, and that's part of my closing spiel because I firmly believe that. During the pandemic, our village broke down a little bit. Networks that support families broke down because we had to stay safe because of COVID, and people stayed in their homes. They weren't on the street. They weren't at, things changed. And so we have a chance right now to build our networks back up. And we can build them the same as they were, or we could build them better. We live in this village, right? This is our home, this is our community. And it's upon us to help the folks that need help to succeed. It's going to make our village a better place to live for us and for everybody else. So we have several agencies here tonight. We've talked about that a little bit. It just so happens that I swim at the Y, and I moved here in 1992 to work for the Big Buddy program. I was the assistant director of the Big Buddy program. I've been on the board of the Big Buddy program, and now I am a Big Buddy for the past 10 years. I started with my little buddy as a volunteer in public schools when she was in first grade, and she is a senior in high school this year. So one of the things I want to say, Mr. Spielvogel said, is consistency is important. I don't want to scare anybody away by what I'm about to say, but I think it's very important. I have been with my little buddy for 10 years. I knew that I wanted to do that. I'm not saying that for applause for me, but the important thing here is it took recognizing that there were learning problems, recognizing that the family was not equipped to help with the learning problems, and knowing that because I don't have kids, I had the time to spend 3 hours twice a week helping this child do homework for 10 years. I'm not in any way saying that to say if you can't do that, don't do this. But I'm here to say I don't think this child would be graduating this year if it was not happening. And Ms. Alexander is shaking her head because she knows the child that I'm talking about. So So if you can be a consistent person that's reading with a child, a consistent person that's teaching something like budget, money, how money works, how you buy a house. I happened to bring my little buddy to my house. And when she saw my house, she said, oh, well, who do you pay your rent to? Or how much rent do you pay? And I was like, well, I don't pay rent. I own the house. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I mean, there are things that you don't know that kids don't know, that you never know what you're going to teach a child. And quite honestly, there are amazing things that my little buddy teaches me. She's got an extended family. There's always somebody in need, and they are always there for each other. When my brother's got a problem, I say, oh, good luck with that. He's not sleeping on my couch. Their family is amazing. So this is not a one-way street. This is you learning to understand other people in our community that maybe you didn't know or didn't understand. This is you sharing resources that are simple. It has not been until the last 2 years that I couldn't help with the math homework. Now all of a sudden my little buddy has gone beyond my math skills, but that's 8 years of help I could give, right? And then I didn't mention the Gardeer Initiative, but Dr. Harrison is amazing. She has, when I moved down here with Big Buddy in 1992, that was one of the areas that we went that there were lots of, there were lots of problems in Gardeer. The way that they are taking the kids and giving them a place to go and providing amazing collaboration with organizations all over the place. My friend Jenny Hastings sitting over here told me I was just there the other day and the kids walked in and they were excited to be here. And just places that are awesome for kids to be. And I loved hearing you say, Dr. Narcisse, that we are not actually, we think of Baton Rouge as a place that is low on resources. We actually do have quite a few resources, is getting them connected in the right ways. And our church has a lot, we do have a lot of people who volunteer. So I may be looking out at a room of people who are saying, I'm already maxed out. But if you're not already maxed out, please visit the tables and see what they've got. And if you're not taking it exactly for you, you've probably got a Sunday school class or a women's circle or a Bible study group or whatever that y'all might be able to share this with. So please take some time to visit the tables. And for the people at the tables, Methodist for Social Justice has a table out at church once a month. So before you leave me with some stuff that we can have at our tables. And then my last thing is, Dr. Cassidy, I assume that your school also accepts volunteers. Okay, so somehow it didn't occur to us to say, let's have Key Academy up here. But I do have a random sign-in sheet that's by my purse here. If you are interested in working with students with dyslexia, you can sign up here as well. So thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you for being here, for sitting here for 2 hours and listening to us, and I appreciate you. We're going to have George Ragsdale come up and give us, he's going to pray us out this evening, but please, before you leave, visit the tables. Thank you.
Let's give Jennifer a big hand and her team for organizing this. And Jennifer is correct, and Tasha is correct too. Everybody out here, I see volunteers in lots and lots of different ways. Matter of fact, at some point in time, most of you out here, I have asked to volunteer at some point in time. But here's my challenge to you. You don't be just the only volunteer. You go recruit 2 or 3 of your friends to say, you know what, you need to be a reading friend, and it's going to be great for you. Now, think about it. There are 65 people in this room. If we each go out and find 2 people, come on, let's have your math skills. A bunch more. Exactly. Exactly. So we can take that and we can take it into the community and we can make a huge, difference. Let's pray together. Lord God, I give you thanks for the people tonight who have come, who love children, who love youth, and do not want to see them left behind, want to see them achieve great things, want to see them move from the place that they are to the place where you say they will be great. Help us, Lord God. Help us to guide and direct our students and give the hearts to them so that they can achieve greatness. Lord God, we give you thanks for our leaders. We give you thanks for our parents. We give you thanks for the teachers. We give you thanks for everybody who interacts with the life of a child and a student. Guide them, Lord God. Open their hearts to the love that you gave to us through your Son, the Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. We'll get together, Lucas. Thanks, George. Sure, you were great. You were great.
See you.